You're listening to the DCAU review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 129 of the DCAU review. Wow, that's crazy to say. I am one of your hosts, Cal. With me, my good friend, good brother, and the gentleman that runs our Twitter page. That's right, it is Liam. Liam, as we wrap up our month of Justice League Unlimited here, we have one more episode that we'll be covering. And before you stop me, yes, we have one additional episode here in the month of October. We'll talk about that a little bit later on what we'll be covering. But this week, we wrap up our Justice League Unlimited coverage for the month with a pivotal first season episode. And boy, am I excited to talk about it.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, we're staying for this last week that we'll be covering JLU, not the last week of October. We will be covering a pretty important one, the next chapter in this sort of early groundwork laying for what will become the kind of the big tentpole arc of the second season, that of course being the Cadmus-arc. And yeah, here today to talk about that, we're talking about an episode that not only has a bunch of those connections and introduces some of our players that will become very important in that storyline, but it also features quite a few homages and references to earlier incarnations of Justice League in animation. So quite a bit to get into with today's episode, where we're talking about Ultimatum.
Yes, Liam, very excited to do that. And we will have the official IMDb synopsis in just a second here from you, as we always do. Before we do, we'll let you know this episode originally aired on Cartoon Network back on December 4th, 2004. So, Liam, that means we're coming up on the 16-year anniversary of this episode in just a few short weeks here. Yeah, so why don't you hit us with that IMDb synopsis so we can get into our four categories today.
Absolutely. And this is for the episode Ultimatum, which was written by Dwayne McDuffie and J.M. DeMatteis, directed by Joaquim DeSantos, with music by the Dynamic Music Partners, and animation by DR Movie Company. And that synopsis reads as such. A team of too good to be true superheroes find out the truth about their origins and go on a rampage.
All right.
I'm gonna give that one a C-.
Short, sweet, to the point, but leaving out some somewhat major details, which will give us a good segue to begin talking about the plot here, Liam. So as we learn here at the beginning of the episode, despite the fact that the Justice League probably has the biggest roster of superheroes in the entire world, universe, galaxy, however you want to put it, there are some newcomers on the scene here that are stealing a little bit of their thunder.
These geniuses dug right into the Earth's magma. Never occurred to them that there'd be anything living down there.
Not to worry, fellow heroes. The Ultimatum are here.
Not them again.
Yes, so we are introduced right at the start to the Ultimen, which is a crew of young, I guess, like somewhere between teenage to 20-something heroes who are, as we come to find out, sort of this product of a government-run superhero team. They have a very good kind of PR about it. They're very kind of kind, but they're also very sort of like, there's a lot of little digs thrown in the way, specifically their leader, Wind Dragon speaks, letting everyone know that the Justice League is old news and that they're here to not necessarily replace them, but it's all very superficial and sort of PR sanitized language for talking about how, hey, cool superheroes in town and you don't need the Justice League anymore is basically what it boils down to.
Yeah, we get the opening scene here, and as you said, their first interaction and our first introduction. Despite the fact that this is apparently not the first time that the Justice League has run into the Ultimen, they mention that they keep seeming to cross paths, and it's revealed that they have actually extended the invitation to the Ultimen to join the Justice League or Justice League Unlimited, and so far the Ultimen have been reluctant to join for some sort of ambiguous, unknown reason, or they're not very clear to the Justice League. They kind of say that they're not quite ready yet. And so this first interaction comes because there is looks like an oil rig somewhere off the coast that is drilling into the core, and there are these magma monsters or volcanic monsters or whatever they are, creatures that come out and begin attacking the workers on this oil rig, which allows the appearance of Wonder Woman, Superman, Aquaman, and Batman, who are our four members of the Justice League that really play into this, despite the fact, not counting the cameos at the end of the episode, they are the four members that we really see throughout this episode.
Yeah, similar to an episode we covered a few weeks ago, Kid Stuff. We have this sort of this four-person team. It's the Trinity plus one, and in that case, it was Green Lantern. But yeah, this week we have Aquaman as the fourth here, and I gotta say, from a story perspective, I don't necessarily know how integral the guy who can swim who can breathe underwater and talk to fish was to the episode. But I like Aquaman's inclusion just because it's a character that, while we know him better than maybe some of the other new roster of heroes, he's still a character that's only appeared a few times. So it's kind of cool to get a little more FaceTime with Aquaman in this episode, and to have him sort of be established here as, even though he isn't one of the founding members of the League, he's still obviously pretty high up in the echelon, and he's sitting at the big conference table with Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman throughout this episode, and is kind of right there and kind of put on equal footing with those three.
It's interesting to get him kind of involved in this. And I read, doing some research on this episode, read that the speculation was that Aquaman, because he was a founding member in the Super Friends, that this was an homage to that. And that's why they included him in the four here, along with Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman.
Yeah, I like that. And like you said, there's a lot of homages, as we mentioned. Beyond that, the lava men that they fight at the beginning of the episode are reminiscent of enemies that they face on a particular episode of Super Friends as well. So as well as the inside of the Ultimen's headquarters appears to be at least somewhat modeled on the classic Super Friends Hall of Justice. So yeah, there's a lot of cute kind of homages there, and yeah, including that as sort of our main team as part of that it adds to the overall atmosphere they're going for, which it's interesting because there's all of those cartoons are very light and surface level, and I think anyone who watched them when they were younger probably has a special place for them. But to contrast all of this kind of silly Super Friends stuff with a pretty, by the end of it, a pretty dark and disturbing plot of the government looking to build their own team of subservient superheroes, and knowing full well that these cloned bodies that they put them in are not going to last. They have, legions of clones of all these characters that they are ready to just replace the current ones with, and they just sort of fill their heads with fake memories and then hire actors to play their families so they feel like they're real people, but in reality they're sort of this puppet of this, as we come to find out later, will be this Project Cadmus.
Yeah, as we said, this plays well into the future here of Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, obviously, in the second season. And we are introduced to a couple characters in this shadowy government agency. Of course, this is the very first appearance of one Amanda Waller, who of course is the antagonist for that second season, and plays a gigantic role in all things that end up in this Cadmus storyline. And we also get the introduction of Maxwell Lord, also who we also have been introduced to, who is in main DC continuity, and of course plays a role. He's sort of the face maybe the PR man of the Ultimen, and seems to be ultimately the reason, no pun intended, ultimately the reason why Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman are very distrusting of this group. Well, Batman, Superman, and Aquaman. Wonder Woman seems to be willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. She has this sort of flirtatious, well, she's not flirtatious. It's sort of one-way flirtation between her and the member Long Shadow. It seems to her it seems to me that her view of the relationship is one more of a mentor-mentee type relationship, while Long Shadow is clearly a little bit smitten with Wonder Woman and looking to try and maybe join the Justice League at some point. And Maxwell Lord's appearance, Batman knows who he is and figures out kind of from the get-go that something is not right here, and something smells bad.
I can't listen to any more of this. This guy's dripping more oil than that platform ever did.
And he has the gall to take cheap shots at us.
I know Maxwell Lord. All he cares about is money.
Well, it takes money to do what we do, and not everyone's independently wealthy.
Lord's a walking ego who'd do anything for a buck and some free publicity. If he's involved in this, it isn't about helping people.
I don't know about Lord, but I think these Ultimen have potential that should be encouraged. Especially Long Shadow. I admit, they're a little overeager. But they're really a nice bunch of kids.
Yeah, this version of Maxwell Lord, in the books, he was sort of originally this PR liaison for the Justice League, and then eventually he turned out to be evil, and they gave him psychic powers, comic book stuff. But in here he's just kind of again playing that role of kind of like this sleazy PR guy who sort of runs the business side. They mentioned sort of in passing how the Ultimen all have sort of merchandising deals. We even see some of their action figures and posters and things on the wall of their clubhouse, and they're talking about how the stand-ins for the Wonder Twins, Shifter and Downpour, are very big with tweens, and whereas Wind Dragon is much more popular with the 18 to 34 and things like that. So he's just kind of this sleazy PR business manager type role. I guess the same kind of lampooning, the type of guy who would be in charge of like a boy band or something. So it is interesting to have that kind of side of it. And again, much like we talked about earlier this month when we looked at Fearful Symmetry, it is yet another example of this children's cartoon sort of looking at the cozy relationship that kind of sleazy, big corporate power can have with government, specifically in this case the U.S. government. So it's interesting to again see that sort of tied in. And yeah, they don't say it expressly, but the implication being that I guess Batman knows Maxwell Lord from probably business dealings with him as Bruce Wayne. And so having that little wrinkle of it as kind of giving the Justice League a reason to be suspicious. And as you mentioned, Cal, there's sort of this subplot revolving around Long Shadow wanting to join the Justice League, but the rest of the team and Max Lord being really not for it at all for various reasons. And then at the same time, Wonder Woman sort of taking an interest in him, as you said, it's to sort of mentor him, and her being a little less suspicious of it. And of course, like we said, from there, they begin to develop new powers, which leads to them getting some tests run on them by one Professor Hamilton.
Your favorite incarnation of Professor Hamilton too.
Sucks.
His brother Alexander.
Yes, Professor Alexander Hamilton here, running tests on them. And again, like I said, they sort of find out that they're these clones, that they've had memories implanted into their brains, that they had actors pretend to be their families, and sort of their whole lives come down around them. And once they realize that, they sort of come to this conclusion that they're going to take revenge on this government facility that spawned them. And then in the midst of that, as they continue to kind of have a breakdown, the Justice League show up to save them. And again, and I guess they sort of attribute it to the degenerative nature of whatever disease is causing them to deteriorate. But Wind Dragon decides that the only way that the Ultimen, this version of the Ultimen, will be remembered is if they kill the Justice League.
I say we just bring the whole building down, right on top of us.
Don't give up hope yet, Downpour. We've got friends in high places.
You idiot. Do you really think that they can help us?
Whatever's going on, we'll do everything in our power to...
Yes, power. That's what it always comes down to, doesn't it? And that's the only way we'll ever be remembered. If we're the ones who take down the Justice League, the world will never forget us!
Listen to yourself. You're not making any sense. You're getting sicker.
Translation? They're afraid to face us. No! As the man said, you're either with us or against us.
All of the members except for Long Shadow sort of go along with it. And
yeah, it's sort of a turn out of left field, and it's interesting because when we are told, when Amanda Waller shows up and has this conversation with Max Lord and Professor Hamilton, we learn that they are breaking down, and Maxwell Lord, at least initially, doesn't want to kind of pull the plug on these ones. He sort of seemingly developed some sort of compassionate relationship with them, and Amanda Waller actually threatens to bring in the Squad if he can't get a hold over this. So obviously here a little bit of foreshadowing, as we know that Task Force X, aka the Suicide Squad, does play a role later on in the storyline. So that she's ready to pull the plug or forcibly pull the plug no matter what, and really kind of reveals her ruthless nature. And then ultimately, once Long Shadow, as he's developing these additional powers as they are, he kind of gets super hearing and apparently is able to overhear this conversation. And then, like you said, they determine, everybody except Long Shadow determined that the way that they are going to be known is by killing the Justice League, which again sort of comes out of nowhere, because before this they were just like, I don't know, they were slightly rebellious teenagers / early 20s superheroes, and now it's like, all right, we're going full evil with these guys, except for Long Shadow, who doesn't have that urge to kill the people that are trying to be compassionate.
Yeah, we said the sort of at the beginning of the episode, there's sort of some like backhanded compliments from Winddragon, and where he's talking about, oh, Superman can't help it that he's getting old. So like it's, I guess that's supposed to be like our build up or our foreshadowing, is that right. He's already sort of has this somewhat antagonistic view of the Justice League and kind of sees them as obsolete already. And then later on, when Long Shadow's kind of arguing with Maxwell Lord in front of them about how he wants to join the Justice League, and Winddragon again has some line like, oh, I just, I used to think that way, but then I grew up or something like that. And so I guess that's a little bit of foreshadowing for it. But yeah, to go from being sort of a little bit kind of, smirky, his crap doesn't stink, all the way to let's murder the greatest heroes who have ever lived is I don't know that turn is completely earned. I guess, like you said, they've gotten more and more desperate, and they feel like there's nothing left that they can do that will have any meaning besides that. But it still feels like we just need an excuse to have a fight at the end a little bit.
Well, that does lead to what is ultimately, I think, other than that opening battle between these lava monsters and the Ultimate and Justice League, this is the only real strong action beat, other than, I guess, the Ultimate trying to escape the Cadmus Tower. This is sort of the climax, and really where the action really comes into play, and you see these homages to the Super Friends and their powers. I don't know if we actually listed the homages to them specifically, but of course the characters, we had Surge, who was a stand-in for Black Vulcan. We have
Juice, actually.
Oh, it is Juice. I don't know why I thought it was
I
Surge.
Also at some point had Surge in my notes, so
maybe they said Surge at some point. I don't know. So Juice is a stand-in for Black Vulcan. Winddragon, as you mentioned, is a stand-in for Samurai. Long Shadow, as we already mentioned, is a stand-in for Apache Chief. And then Downpour and Shifter are stand-ins for Zan and Jaina, who were, of course, the Wonder Twins. There's also a stand-in, a little homage to Wonder Dog, who was sort of a Scooby-Doo looking character that was introduced, I think, into the very late runs of the Super Friends and maybe the Super Friend comic also, I think.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And yeah, there was like another brother-sister duo who I don't think had powers, called Wendy and Marvin. And they had the one Rex the Wonder Dog as their dog. And yeah, that was definitely part of one of the various incarnations there. I think we've talked about that briefly before, but there was like 18 different versions of that Super Friends cartoon.
Right.
So they would have different rosters and different characters on each of them. But yes, I think, yeah, this was sort of a one. Interesting, though, that considering they went with this Wonder Twins, that it wasn't a genetically altered monkey, because you would think Gleek would be the reference to make here rather than Wonder Dog.
Correct. Yeah, I guess so. Dwayne McDuffie was the one who was responsible for this cameo. And it's actually the dog itself is modeled off of we haven't gotten to that episode yet in our reviews of Batman Beyond, but the episode Ace in the Hole, there are some genetically mutated dogs that are part of a dog fighting ring that Ace gets involved or gets kidnapped and placed into. And this dog appears to be somewhat made up similar to that. So I guess that's another retroactive Easter egg of these dogs are also a responsibility of Cadmus origins also. So very interesting with that. But yeah, so we get to see these powers sort of manifested very similar to the ones that we used to see in Super Friends. And we get the battle that we were looking for, that, maybe that we suspected at the beginning of the episode would ultimately happen. And we get Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and Aquaman versus these and Long Shadow, who is sides with the Justice League against the Ultimen. And we get a lot of battle between the Wonder Twin stand-ins here with Downpour and Shifter battling against Aquaman. They have a battle underwater. That seemed to be the Downpour. I guess that's the name. Is like they just turned into liquid, which I guess is what Zan used to do in Super Friends, but
yeah,
strictly liquid things. But of course, he picked a fight with Aquaman, which ends up being funny. And ultimately, of course, the Justice League prevail. And at the end, the Cadmus shows up to reclaim what is rightfully theirs. And Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and Aquaman stand between Cadmus and Long Shadow because he doesn't want to go with them and they don't want them to take them. And Batman is certainly very concerned and interested about who this shady government agency is that seems to be reclaiming these heroes. And we get an interesting, certainly an interesting initial interaction between Batman and Amanda Waller, setting up their storyline going forward.
Yeah, that is kind of the big reveal of this episode, beyond just that we get the first mention of the name Cadmus and the introduction of the characters, that being Amanda Waller, obviously, is that, yes, at the end it is, pretty directly and there's not really any ambiguity. Like, she makes it clear she knows who Batman is, and she kind of would therefore imply that she knows who all of the Justice Leaguers with secret identities are, and sort of tells him to back off and not look too much into it. But they do allow the Justice League to take Long Shadow with them. But yeah, it's not a direct cliffhanger in the sense that like there's some great thing that it's like a big to be continued part where it's like in the middle of an action scene it fades to black. But it is a pretty great, again, a nice little tease, very similar to the end of Fearful Symmetry, where it just lets you know we're just getting started here, and this foe will not be like any normal foe that we have seen these people wrestle with from the original Batman animated series up through now, and that this is really going to be an entirely different animal.
You need to step back.
Not gonna happen. Long Shadow's with us.
Safeties.
bigger than yours.
Stand down. He's free to go with you for however long he's got.
Who are you people?
That's a national security matter. And if I were you, I wouldn't probe the situation too closely, rich boy.
Yeah, absolutely. We're setting things up nicely here for a lot of interesting things to come here. So I guess, Liam, we can get into the plot here, or get into our scores for our plot, as we've kind of reviewed the whole episode at this point. So I will say this, knowing what comes after this is an exciting episode, but as like in a bubble, this episode in and of itself, it's kind of a weird episode because it has to do a lot of setting up of these characters and kind of makes you feel for these characters, these Ultimen, but you end up hating most of them because they end up doing this kind of out of left field, we're going to be straight up evil turn, except for Long Shadow, who ultimately seems to be redeemed, or not redeemed, but had this heart of gold from the beginning, and the Justice League sort of takes home with him. But this is his final appearance. So we are led to believe, at least based on the fact that we don't see him again, that he dies, or that, they are not able to prevent his death. So he sort of is invited to the Justice League, and then we don't really get an answer as to what happens to him. So this is sort of like a weird, at least to my knowledge, we don't get any comment about him passing away or them like letting him retire on a farm someplace or something. He appears on the Watchtower and to this triumphant entrance, and then, well, that's it. And we do get Ultimen later on, but we don't see this version of the Ultimen later on. So it feels kind of weird that some things are left open, and we had these versions of these characters introduced here, but this is kind of a self-contained episode in that way.
Yeah, it is interesting the way that's sort of laid out, where yes, whereas this is obviously an important part because of what comes later on involving not only Amanda Waller, but yes, versions of the Ultimen do show up again, but these versions that have like their own distinct personalities and feelings and everything do not exist after this episode. So yeah, I was just kind of thinking like, yeah, like the second we fade to black, like Long Shadow's eyes just rolled in the back of his head and he collapsed. Like I was just kind of thinking like, and then never talk about it again. This was a weird idea, Wonder Woman, and we washed our hands of it.
Oh man.
But yeah, that is kind of an awkward thing where they sort of set up, and you would think that either yes, there would be some throwaway dialogue in a later Cadmus episode, or you might see him in the back if he did survive, that you would see him at least in the background of some of the later episodes, but you do not. So we are left with only one choice, in my opinion, and that is that the second this episode ends, he died.
Yeah, I mean it's canon until proven otherwise. Yeah, so because of that, and because of the there is some fun stuff in here, and being I think we've touched on it a little bit, that we got to experience some of the Super Friends in its reruns on Cartoon Network, and I don't know that it necessarily holds the place in our hearts that maybe that someone grew up on those series, like watching them in their original airings does. So I appreciate the homages, but I think it's a little bit one generation below us, or, half a generation maybe below us. So because of that, I do appreciate that, but because it's not all in the warm and fuzzies, I think looking at the story as a whole, looking at the sort of unresolved nature of what it ultimately ends with, and looking at it as a contained episode, I went ahead and gave plot a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, and I'm right in that same ballpark there. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Like I said, I do like it. I think it's fun because of all the homages, because we get, in the case of Aquaman, a character that we don't necessarily get to spend a lot of time with here in a prominent role, and because of what it sets up. However, I think what we've talked about sort of being the downfall is that these characters, again, aside from Amanda Waller, none of these characters in this form really ever come back. Maxwell Lord doesn't really come back. And And obviously, like we said, the Ultimen do return, but not this version of them. So it's the stuff that's good is really good, but the rest of it is just kind of these kind of little ancillary stuff that doesn't really add a lot to what ends up being sort of the final product of this war between the Justice League and Cadmus.
I agree. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be visuals and animation. So we've sort of alluded to some of the things here this week, but what stood out for you as far as highlights for different things that we saw visually and maybe in the animation?
Well, yeah, as we talked about, there isn't a lot of traditional superhero action in this episode. Also, kind of like a lot of Super Friends cartoons. But we get this opening scene of these lava monsters that apparently were disturbed by an oil rig that was drilling too close to the Earth's core. We get to see the Justice League and the Ultimen dealing with those. That's a fun enough action. It's just these kind of generic looking. They kind of look like Magma from the Terrific Trio.
Yep.
They don't have like eyes and mouths, but otherwise they look pretty similar to those designs. And then we have, other than that, obviously, we've already kind of touched on the final battle, and we'll get more into that in a second. I do think it is worth mentioning, in the middle of the episode, we talked about it in plot, that there's this subplot of Long Shadow wanting to work with the Justice League and sort of teaming up with Wonder Woman on the side a little bit. And we do get this kind of wacky, like 2-minute scene where Giganta is trying to break Grodd out of prison. And in the midst of that, she has in fact brought help in the form of Bizarro. So we have a returning villain from Superman the Animated Series here, and it's a pretty brief bit. Like Giganta is kind of walking around in her giant form, and then Long Shadow shows that he can also grow to enormous sizes, which sort of neutralizes her. And then we just sort of get this brief fight between Wonder Woman and Bizarro. That being said, it was kind of cool to just throw in a couple random villains and have Wonder Woman fight them for a minute.
Yeah, that's always, two giants fighting each other is always fun. And I don't think we've covered the episode yet where Giganta makes her initial appearance, which I think is Secret Society. We've not covered that yet. But yes, her making an appearance here was certainly, giant. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, like superheroes battling giant adversaries is always like a plus. And then you have two giant people fighting in like the outside of a prison. Like, yeah, I'm all for it. Like, let's do it. Great visual there. And of course, Bizarro being there, I don't know. I don't get the context or how it makes sense, but sure. All right. Why not throw Bizarro in there? Maybe just somebody that is powerful and they just wanted to draw into this episode, I guess.
I will say, I guess what we know is that since we last saw Bizarro in Superman the Animated Series, he has developed what I believe in 2020, he has become a simp for Giganta. He simps for Giganta, who in turn simps for Grodd. So he even has a funny line, as we'll get to in voice acting, about how he'll help the woman he loves do whatever she wants, including breaking her boyfriend out of prison. But yes, that bit with him fighting Wonder Woman. Again, it didn't have to be Bizarro. It could have been anybody, but it's kind of fun that they just threw that in there. As we'll get to, there's another fun reason in voice acting. But yeah, other than that, yeah, we have the final battle between the Ultimen and the Justice League. We get a cool little brief battle between Juice and Batman, which is fun. And then probably the best part of the entire episode for me, or at least the coolest part, which is, as we mentioned, the two Wonder Twins stand-ins, Downpour and Shifter, have this battle. They basically flood a room. Shifter turns into a dinosaur. Aquaman's able to knock her out. And in retaliation, Downpour just shoots like a giant jet stream of water at him, which, of course, Aquaman easily blocks before reminding Shifter that he is the king of the G-darn ocean. And then Aquaman gets to show off his pimp hand.
Yeah, that was great. He gives him the old backhand. This version of Aquaman, I think we already mentioned it, definitely feels like when they decided to go with the Jason Momoa version of Aquaman, they certainly lifted some from this, because he is just one tough SOB. And we covered that a little bit in The Enemy Below. Already plugged that one, in the archives at DCAUreview.com. But this one, he's really, really cool in this episode. From the get-go, Aquaman is just really, really awesome in this episode. I wrote down Aquaman, badass king of the seas.
Yes, that scene's great. Also during that fight with the lava monsters, we show off that his hook has a function beyond just looking cool, and that he shoots it and it's got like a long rope attached to it, and he knocks a couple of the lava monsters off with it before sort of retracting it. So
he's installed that. He's installed that since he first installed the hook, because we weren't aware that was something. But that's also something that was in main content DC continuity that we had seen him do. So it's cool that they included that function into it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I definitely think Aquaman's the standout. The final little bit there is Superman's trying to reason with Wind Dragon, and Wind Dragon begins to literally suck the oxygen out of Superman's lungs. Is kind of a cool visual. But yeah, I think there's some good stuff. I don't think anything stands out as awesome other than Aquaman. That being said, I think there is some cool stuff. Like we said, the background designs and everything. We get sort of our first looks at like Cadmus facilities and stuff like that. Plus we get the debut of Amanda Waller. I think there's still a lot of fun stuff. Like I said, I liked the attempted prison break in the middle there. I settled on a 7 out of 10 for visuals.
Nice. I went a little bit higher with that. There were some things that I really enjoyed. There's a lot of scenes in this episode that are lit by various different like mood lighting. There's some scenes that are lit specifically just by screens. The rest of the room is dark, and they're sort of backlit or front lit by screen reflections. So there's some weird hues over a couple of different scenes. I always appreciate that. It gives certain scenes a little bit more of a punch, and things stand out, and it certainly adds a little bit of atmosphere to those scenes. So I appreciated that. Liam, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the introduction, the 3-second introduction and only appearance of the whirly bat contraption that Batman flies as he enters one of the final battle scenes here. He's carrying Aquaman on it, and in my notes I wrote, "What the F is Batman flying?"
Yeah, so this is like a late 50s, early 60s invention, although they didn't really look like this, but it was literally like a pedal-powered single-person helicopter that Batman and Robin would fly around in sometimes, called whirly bats, and they sort of repurposed that here into being this sort of like, I don't know, just like mini helicopter seat that he's flying in, and that Aquaman sort of hitches a ride on. It's like a Earth version of like Orion, like a low tech version of like Orion's like rocket sled, I guess.
That's a good comparison. It is completely and totally out of left field. It never makes another appearance again. It was funny on the on the audio commentary for The Return, which we actually just covered in the archives at DCAUreview.com. There is they comment about that on that commentary, and Bruce Timm says that they spent just an elaborate amount of time trying to get this whirly bat looking right, and fans just hated it, absolutely hated it. So they wasted all this time for a 3-second or 4-second appearance of this invention, and fans ended up hating it, and it's never seen again.
Well, I mean, like, why we could have just used his weird jetpack thing from World's Finest, right?
Correct.
Like, Aquaman could have caught a ride on that, or we've established by now that Aquaman has a grappling hook, a literal grappling hook for a hand. So, like, he could have just been swinging up towards it or something, or, Superman or Wonder Woman could have been carrying him. Like, I feel like there's a lot of ways that Aquaman could have gotten into the building. besides the route that they took, which is him hitching a ride on the whirly bat. But it is very wacky. Like, I didn't have like some adverse reaction to it, as apparently some fans did back when this aired, but it is a very wacky moment.
Indeed. Other than the whirly bat, I really enjoyed the certainly the manifestation of a lot of the different powers from the Ultimen. As we mentioned, their powers are sort of evolving as the show goes on here. Of course, we have various different the powers that were allusions or homages to those Super Friends powers. So of course, Wind Dragon, who is the stand-in for Samurai, as we already mentioned, has the power of wind, and that sort of evolves into also being able to maybe change the temperature also around him. Of course, Juice has the electricity manipulation power, stand-in for Black Vulcan. So his visualization of some of his powers is I like when they're sitting there watching TV and they're trying to break out of the Cadmus holding chamber there, where the electricity sort of crawls along the floor up the wall and then destroys the camera.
Yeah, that was awesome.
But I think, honestly, the stars have to be Downpour and Shifter, and just their constant. As I said, Downpour is he's liquid pretty much the entire time, various forms of liquid, and I think there are jokes to be had there between like tsunami, I think at one point he says, or like it's just this, it's the same thing. It's just like tidal wave, tsunami, like right. Just various different forms of large bodies of, or like.
Can he turn into both salt and fresh water, you think? Or
that's a very good question. I don't know. I think we have to make up our minds here. I'm going to go with yes.
Okay. All right.
I think canon until proven otherwise. Yeah. But then, of course, the fun part, I would say, or the shifter, turning into various different animals. We see a rhinoceros. We see a T-Rex that's fighting Aquaman underwater. Like, that's a weird sentence to say. Aquaman fights a T-Rex underwater. We get a sea dragon also, or sea serpent, making an appearance here. So really a lot of fun stuff there. A lot of fun visuals there. I thought visuals were the strongest things in this episode. So I went ahead and gave visuals a very strong 9 out of 10.
Yeah, it's really good. Like I said, I think earlier, but I'll reiterate it here. Yeah, I went 7 out of 10. There's quite a few good things, but I guess I was looking for maybe a little bit more knockdown, drag out action in that final bit. And like I said, we do get some cool stuff, but that's, like we said, the time between when Wind Dragon announces that they're going to kill the Justice League to when that is resolved, it's all happens in about 2.5 minutes. So
that's true.
And part of that, again, you can say is the constraints of a 22-minute cartoon versus the 44 minutes they had in the original Justice League run, where every episode was split into 2 parts. But yeah, that being said, there's still, as we've talked about, quite a few cool and fun things. I will just mention this again, and I'm like, maybe this is just the JLU Wonder Woman design. Maybe it was just tweaked and I hadn't noticed, but Wonder Woman still looks weird to me. Like, she still looked a little bit like off model to me in this episode, at least compared to, maybe I'm just still thinking of like the season 1 Justice League design or something, but I feel like she was taller than most of the men on the team in the first season of Justice League, and now she isn't. I don't know. Maybe I'm just imagining things.
One last thing I'll mention about visuals before we move on is that we didn't really mention was the uniforms for the Ultimen. They, at least for Downpour and Shifter, they certainly have homages to the Wonder Twins with the sort of the triangle logos and the coloring. Certainly their ears also very, very invoke that Wonder Twin look. Long Shadow, obviously a stand-in for Apache Chief. His is more, I think, Aztec Native American, or like South American Native, as opposed to sort of what may have been more racially insensitive interpretation of that character in the 70s and 80s. And then the other two similar but different enough than their stand-ins from the Super Friends. But I thought the uniforms also were all pretty cool looking.
Yeah, like Juice kind of has like his glasses or his mask kind of make a similar shape to Black Vulcan's mask, although thankfully Juice gets to wear pants. And then yes, the stand-in for Samurai Wind Dragon, he's probably the most drastically different. Everyone else
also gets to wear pants.
Yes, he gets to wear pants, and also he has like this very kind of futuristic, like very Power Rangers-y superhero suit that he's in. And it's also a completely different color scheme of like red and white, as opposed to the sort of weird like green and orange suit that Samurai had in the original Super Friends cartoons. But the designs of those are pretty striking, and it does feel like this like weird corporate government run PR sanitized superhero team. like the way they're dressed and everything, I think it adds to that.
Oh yeah, totally. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category here, which is going to be music. So as we've mentioned each and every week, this soundtrack is not available to listen to in isolation, but I think this was the rare episode to me where they did a good job in making the audio sort of stick out and sort of punctuate various scenes here. Any musical notes for you?
Not a lot. I think the action music is done pretty well throughout. I like the musical cue when Bizarro shows up, and they don't go quite the same way they did in Superman the Animated Series, where they sort of play this awkward, like weird minor key version of the Shirley Walker theme, but they still sort of play this very wacky sort of heroic theme, but played in a different key than a hero theme would normally be played for Bizarro, which I think works really well for that category. And then the music, as they're sort of learning about their, like when they come face to face with themselves in the cloning tubes, I think there's some good sort of dramatic music there, some good use of strings there. But like I said, I think the music is solid, but I didn't have a ton of notes as far as what stood out to me. But what about you?
Yeah, I thought that there is a bit of an Ultimatum theme that plays throughout. If you hear it at the beginning, it's sort of played when they enter the scene with the lava monsters. It's sort of played in a triumphant way, and then kind of gets more sinister as the episode goes on. And then they sort of work it in a little bit in a more of a triumphant way again at the end when Long Shadow joins the Justice League at the Watchtower. So I think that was the main notes that I had. There was some music also that played in that first interaction between Batman and Amanda Waller, as Batman is sort of taunting her and she taunts him right back. There's some music in that scene that really builds the tension of what's going to happen. Is the Justice League gonna do battle here against the U.S. government, or how's this going to go down? So I felt that built the tension as well. And then there was a hint of the Shirley Walker Superman theme that is played at the beginning as Superman is battling one of the lava monsters. They sort of form this magma rock around him. And he's sort of being taunted by the Ultiman as being a little bit too old, or maybe over the hill, and he sort of questions too old. And as he breaks out of it, there's just a very slight hint of the Shirley Walker Superman theme. So I appreciated that. Other than that, this is I did catch that the Ultiman theme was actually one of the, I believe it was Long Shadow's ringtone also. They sort of tied it into that as being sort of the corporate theme almost for the Ultiman. So I appreciated that. Overall, again, this would be another one that would be nice to be able to listen to in isolation to truly appreciate the whole Ultiman theme and the sort of reoccurring theme throughout. But with that said, I felt like music did play a prominent role in this, certainly at the end and certainly at the parts where it needed to be. So I went with a pretty strong 7 out of 10.
Nice. Yeah. And I'm right there behind you with a 6 out of 10. That's awesome. That's definitely some notes that I would go back and probably listen to after we record here just to get a more full appeal for it. But yeah, it's always great. We always talk about that when certain episodes, whether it's a character theme or just the episode itself having a unique theme, it really does kind of give it its own life. And yeah, that's a great point.
Awesome. All right, William, let's wrap things up with our final score of the day. That is going to be for our voice acting. I know that we have quite the large cast today with all these extra new characters. So let's get into breaking down who's in our voice cast this week.
So, deep breaths. I'm just going to start it with them. Just tear the Band-Aid off. Robert Foxworth as Alexander Hamilton. I know in the credits it says Professor Emil Hamilton, but I assure you that must be a mistake. But anyway,
replaced him with a imposter, and we're the only ones to figure it out.
That's the secret code that no one else discovered 10 years later, or 20 years later almost now. Yes, so he is in this episode briefly. So I just want to mention that because that's important, even though I don't really want to talk about it. And then we have, as we mentioned, the returning Scott Rummel as Aquaman. Like we said, this is kind of a chance for him to show off a little bit more range with the character, whereas in The Enemy Below, which is the only other Aquaman episode we've reviewed thus far, he's very much more sort of the noble. It's a lot of talking about duty and I must protect my kingdom and all that. And we do get to see him, shine a little bit more, I think, in the second part of that episode, certainly when he's confronting his brother and sort of dealing with the aftermath of that plot to kill him and his son. But here, as we talked about, he's a lot closer to the Jason Momoa version, where he's really cool and he gets a lot of one-liners. He's very sarcastic and he's a lot of fun in this episode.
Looking forward to seeing some more of his Aquaman in the future.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, this eventually there was a similar to the Bat villain embargo. I believe there was an Aquaman embargo placed on the last couple seasons of Justice League Unlimited, which is why he kind of stopped showing up after a little bit here, and why Black Manta wasn't able to be used in the final season. But yeah, we still have a couple appearances, both in the original Justice League as well as one more in JLU that we get to talk about before we have to say goodbye. But yeah, I definitely think this is the most fun appearance we've had so far of Aquaman in the couple that we've covered here. But other than that, we also have, should mention, Tim Matheson as Maxwell Lord, who people would know from playing the vice president on The West Wing, as well as numerous other television roles.
I think he did a great job.
Yeah, he's really good because, again, even in that first scene where he's just kind of being interviewed as like the PR face of the Ultimatum, and he's kind of negging the Justice League and talking up his guys, and then sort of every scene he's in, I feel like you get that feeling that he is literally saying whatever he has to say to make sure that he gets like the best possible outcome out of whatever the situation is, and I think he does a good job with that.
No, I think he's really, really good. I think that's a shame we don't get another appearance of him in the DCAU, because it would have been interesting to see him flesh out that character, maybe get some comeuppance at some point, because he sort of does he gets a little bit, he gets threatened by the Ultimatum as they are trying to kind of save their bacon, but it doesn't, we don't really get to see the slimy billionaire get his, and that's always fun to see.
Absolutely. And yeah, rounding out the rest of our voice cast before we get to the Ultimen themselves and of course, our main Justice Leaguers, we have Jennifer Hale making an appearance as Giganta. Of course, she also plays Killer Frost and several other roles throughout this series. We have the first appearance, as mentioned, of Amanda Waller, played by CCH Pounder, who I believe also does the voice of Juice, which is funny.
I was wondering. That's such a. I mean, we always like struggle to where to put this like sound design in, and I guess it sort of slots itself into voice acting. But the voice effect that they put on Juice is really cool.
Yes, it's really, really cool, and it makes him feel very, very unique. But yeah, apparently she also did his voice as well. But yeah, people who know CCH Pounder, she's been on some of the NCIS shows. She was in the most recent Godzilla movie, American Godzilla movie, I should say, as well as just a lot of other TV and voice acting roles. She's awesome. I think this is just kind of scratching the surface. I think she's a little bit more over the top villain in this episode than some of her later appearances. But that's, again, we talk about this a lot with the DCAU voices being the voices you hear if you read a comic featuring that character. But she really does a great job of embodying that Amanda Waller character really from day one.
Yeah, I think you're spot on when you say that this is just scratching the surface. She comes off. This is a character, obviously, with the position that it's in, that could teeter towards that danger of being a Saturday morning superhero cartoon. Like, you could almost push the performance to that point because of the amount of power that this seemingly normal character has, and influence, and certainly it being the adversary to this super powered league of superheroes. And then you have this normal, 5 foot tall government agent also that's going to be, you're trying to convince me is their biggest adversary. The temptation certainly could be to cast somebody that has a voice that is, needs to communicate that they're evil and they're, and kudos to the GOAT. Obviously, Andrea Romano has done this for a very long time, and
yes.
Why we sing her praises all the time. She knew that this would be the perfect casting for this character, and CCH Pounder does such a great job of her performance coming through here, being subtly subtly evil. And this character, I mean, to me, she could play this character in live action if need be. Like, she
agreed.
She's clearly does such a great job of communicating that. I don't know. It's threatening without having to come out and specifically say what she's going to do. She just carries this power in her voice, despite her character maybe not looking like this formidable foe. So it all comes through that voice acting. And like you said, we have her best work. She does a great job in this episode, but certainly her best work is in front of her in this series.
Yeah, no doubt. And moving on to our Ultimatum cast, we have Gray Delisle, although I believe now she goes by Gray Griffin, as both Downpour and Shifter. Just an incredibly prolific voice actress. She voiced Catwoman in the Batman Arkham games. She voices Daphne in several of the Scooby-Doo cartoons over the last 20 years or so. Did voices on Samurai Jack, Billy and Mandy, a lot of different cartoons. If you watched a cartoon anytime or played a video game anytime in about the last 20 years, you've probably heard her voice. And she does a good job as playing, she's playing a brother and a sister, so she gets to do kind of two unique voices. And I think she does a good job with that.
Yeah, there's one scene that they get to sort of interact with each other, talking about lamenting being teen idols. They're tired of being teen idols, and Maxwell Lord presents them with a royalty check, and they sort of quiet down after that. But I thought that playing dual roles is always a difficult thing, and certainly differentiating enough between a male and a female is also its own sort of weight to carry. And I thought she does a great job.
Agreed. And our last two here, and I wanted to point this out, Cal. We've talked about this before in certain episodes of Batman, but this is maybe our first time talking about in Justice League. They made the decision, obviously based on who they were sort of avatars for from that Super Friends cartoon. Wind Dragon is seemingly of Asian descent, and Long Shadow, of course, being of some sort of Native American descent. And so they went out and they cast James Shee as Wind Dragon, who folks would know from being the voice of Jackie Chan on Jackie Chan Adventures, as Wind Dragon. And they cast Greg Rainwater as Long Shadow. And I do think it's worth pointing out again, this now obviously by the mid-2000s, this was less commonplace. But casting actual Native Americans, casting people, if you're going to cast or make characters that are a certain ethnicity, to actually cast actors of that ethnicity to play those characters was not always commonplace. As we've probably, if you've seen things about like, The Simpsons is recasting voices after 20 years because they had a white guy playing an Indian person and things like that. It is, I think, cool and good that even back in, I guess, 2004, 2005, that Andrea Romano and the people working on these shows felt it was important to actually cast Asian Americans, and in this case, a Native American, in the roles that would represent those characters to them. Greg Rainwater as Long Shadow certainly gets a little bit more to do than most of the other Ultimen in this episode. Based on his multiple scenes, I think he does a pretty good job. He has that sort of natural immatureness to him, as you mentioned, the sort of schoolboy crush that he seems to have on Wonder Woman. He's very kind of unsure of himself and is kind of like stammering over his words when he tells her that he wants to work with her, and going from that to sort of those final moments of the episode where he's kind of yelling at Wind Dragon that Superman was, at least at one point, was your hero. You don't have to do this. And I think that the dichotomy between the two, and as we mentioned, it sort of breaks down throughout the episode of Long Shadow wanting to join the Justice League and Wind Dragon kind of being very dismissive and kind of in some ways sort of openly hostile towards the Justice League. I think they both do a good job.
Yeah, I think their interactions and sort of their almost switching of roles here. At the beginning, Wind Dragon is clearly the face of the Ultimen. He's the spokesperson. He's the one out in front, sort of answering questions after this lava monster attack. And then throughout, we see Long Shadow sort of come out of his shell a little bit, and he becomes more of the leader for the group, and he's the reason why they're able to rally and figure out that all this stuff begins. And when he's able to show a little bit more emotion, and certainly, him trying to talk down the Ultimen from this idiotic plan to fight the Justice League, I think that him being able to show emotion and sort of disappointment and sort of confusion as to where they are and why they're doing this, certainly is his opportunity. And so, yeah, he does a really good job.
Yeah, I agree. And then just wrapping it up, we have our Trinity, that being George Newbern, who gets to play not only Superman, but we get what I believe would have to be his first time getting to play Bizarro. Of course, we talked about, if you can go back and listen to the episode we did where we covered Bizarro's debut in Superman the Animated Series, talked about kind of how fun and wacky Tim Daly's Bizarro voice is. And I think George Newbern, it's different. It's not quite so over the top as Tim Daly's is, but it's still fun to see sort of his take on that Bizarro voice, I think. And of course, we have Susan Eisenberg as Wonder Woman. Again, it's funny, a lot of these kind of season 1 episodes that we've covered so far have kind of featured her very prominently, and which is obviously a good thing, both because the character is great and because Susan Eisenberg continues to be very, very good in the role, and great most of the time. And this is no exception here. Like we said, she kind of the main leaguers, she kind of has the most to do because she has this subplot where she's working with Long Shadow, and they have a scene after they've stopped Giganta where they're sort of sitting and Long Shadow is talking about what we later find out are sort of these implanted memories of his childhood, and she's encouraging him, and then the ending, I think the very last line of the episode right before Long Shadow dies, is when Wonder Woman they teleport into the Watchtower. We get this big awesome shot of the Watchtower in all its glory. We see tons of cameos from various other members of the League, and then Wonder Woman just turns back and says, "Welcome to the Justice League." And we, Long Shadow has this big smile on his face. And I think Susan Eisenberg does a great job in this episode.
Welcome to the Justice League.
Yeah, she carries the bulk of I think the bulk of it. Maybe Superman has as much to carry, but she carries the bulk of the load here for the Justice League themselves. So I think her interactions with Long Shadow are great. And she does it. She, as I said at the beginning, she's the one who's certainly willing to give Justice League, or the Ultimen rather, their due, and see and more trusting of them, where Batman and Superman and Aquaman are more on the fence and maybe even leaning towards them being more sinister. And so her sort of appealing to that, despite the fact that maybe we've seen her just last week kind of fed up with Man's World and maybe not as trusting. She's learned from that episode, and maybe has a little bit of her innocence is renewed, and her belief in the greater good versus just assuming that everything's going bad. So it was interesting to see that dynamic play out again.
Yeah, for sure. Superman does get some fun bits, as we mentioned. This also is very mildly seems to take a little bit from, and I didn't read anything that said this was intentional, but there is a Superman story called What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, which was later made into a animated movie called Superman versus the Elite. But it's basically the basic idea is a brand new young hip superhero team shows up, and they kind of take away Superman's thunder and kind of make him look like embarrass him a little bit, and people sort of it leads to this question of, is Superman still relevant and modern? And we get just a little touch of that, like we said at the beginning, with Wind Dragon sort of mocking Superman for being over the hill, and as they're doing this press conference, and Wind Dragon is given this sort of very over the top message about how we must not disturb nature in our quest for finding sources of energy or whatever. And even Superman, the ultimate farm boy who still believes in Santa Claus, is like, oh my gosh, this is so corny. Like even Superman can't take the Ultimen as earnest as they appear to be at the start of the episode. And as you mentioned, his back and forth with Scott Rummel's Aquaman, and of course Kevin Conroy is Batman, as they're sort of discussing Max Lord and the Ultimen is pretty fun too. But yeah, not a lot for Kevin Conroy to do. Although I will mention, I have to assume this is the one episode where he gets to utter a very classic Batman utterance, which is "old chum."
Yes, I loved that. It was so good.
Yes, at the start of the episode, Long Shadow refers to them as old chums, and then later on, after Batman has defeated Juice, he kind of throws it back on them and gets to use that phrase, which of course Batman would normally refer to mostly Robin, but several of his associates over the years as chums or old chum, and that's a very classic thing, obviously made very popular by the Adam West Batman and sort of the comics of that era. So I was like, well, if nothing else, even though he doesn't have a lot to do in this episode, we do get to hear Kevin Conroy say old chum. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was pretty awesome. I appreciated that. So I guess this will bring us to our final scores, or for our scores here, Liam, for our voice acting, with the large cast, with everybody doing such a great job, and with some fun to be had in the midst of it. I went ahead and gave voice acting a 9 out of 10.
Nice. And it's a good thing that Robert Foxworth is only in it for about 30 seconds this week, because I was actually still willing, despite his appearance, to give it a perfect 10 out of 10 this time.
Oh, love it. Absolutely love it. You were able to move past your Professor Hamilton, the new Professor Hamilton hatred to give it a good score.
Hashtag not my Hamilton. Doesn't work quite as well as Not My Alfred did, but whatever. That's a callback to our very early episodes. But overall, I think a very strong voice performance by just about everybody in the cast there. So
love it. Yeah, man, absolutely. All right, Liam, tallying up our scores here at the end, I end up with a very, very impressive 31 out of 40 for this week's episode.
And I am just a bit behind you there with a 30 out of 40. As far as getting into rewatchability goes, I think, like we said, even though this doesn't work so well as a standalone piece, it is very obviously a lot of the elements here come back later on in almost every episode of the second season of Justice League Unlimited. So yeah, I think this is pretty high up on the must watch if you're going through Justice League Unlimited.
Yeah, I agree. It's a must watch because of the introduction of Cadmus, like the official introduction of Cadmus here. The Ultimen come back into play later on, even though it's not this incarnation of them. Amanda Waller, obviously a very important part going forward. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say this is a must watch.
Agreed.
All right, Liam, let's wrap things up. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening to us. Don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We are all there. If you can, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. 5 stars are awesome, but if you don't think we deserve 5 stars, that's okay. Let us know what you like, what you don't like. We very much appreciate that. And if you've left a review before, you can leave another review. So that will also help us. So if you're feeling generous, go ahead and do that. Don't forget to also follow us on our social media at DCAU Review, Instagram and Twitter. As I mentioned, Liam runs our Twitter page, does a great job over there. We're always talking about all things DCAU, even venturing into standard DC universe continuity and everything that's happening these days over there. Liam, let us preview, shall we, next week's episode. We alluded to it at the beginning of the episode that we will not be continuing with Justice League Unlimited at this point. We will be saying adieu, at least temporarily, here until we cover it the next time. So that means that with our 5th Saturday in October, we are going to be covering an Elseworlds episode coming up next week.
That's right. And this is one that has been requested a few times, going way back to early on the podcast when we first started to introduce the concept of doing Elseworlds episodes. So next week, for the 5th Saturday in October, we will in fact be covering the first 2 episodes of Young Justice, entitled Independence Day.
Awesome. Yeah, this is one. Obviously, Young Justice has quite the following, almost a cult-like following that has brought it back from the dead seemingly several times. So I think I may have watched this episode one time. I haven't really gotten into Young Justice, so kind of going in fresh with this one. I'm really excited about that. What about you?
Yeah, for sure. I didn't watch a ton of the series. I was sort of aware of it and sort of watched. I can remember watching a little bit of it, but I was never like a giant fan either. So yeah, I look forward to going into this with somewhat fresh eyes and kind of seeing the origins of another beloved take on a lot of these characters.
It's going to be awesome. Don't forget also, if you want to support the podcast, head over to DCAUreview.com. Click on our shop. You can buy a t-shirt. You can buy a hat, buy a sweatshirt. Support the podcast since we don't do ads here. But until next week, I am Cal.
And I'm Liam.
We'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.